call, and as we do share the recording within a couple of business days up on our website in case you want to review some of what was said, or you have colleagues that you want to share this with, or you have to leave us early and really want to catch up on what you might have missed. So today we're really looking ahead to the next month, where many of us will be sort of celebrating, but also trying to bring focus to TB around World TB Day, which falls at the end, not next month, Katie. Wake up, it is already March. It's just in a few weeks, on the 24th. So apologies. And so what we wanted to bring today was a discussion around sort of innovation in TB. We have colleagues from TAG who are here. We have a TB brief that we're going to launch. And we just want to focus a bit on innovation and the need to sort of fully fund the TB response, so that hopefully that provides some inspiration as you are finalizing some of your sort of World TB Day activities or interventions. And so part of the reason we're talking about TB today, more specifically, I had the opportunity to attend a Stop TB partnership meeting very early this year, just as He Who Shall Not Be Named was being inaugurated in DC. And I was really optimistic and excited at the beginning of this year. And in fact, that meeting was a really, critical and interesting set of conversations, in my opinion, because I came out of those meetings feeling very strongly that we have a lot of new tools and a lot more enablers in terms of the way that we need to address TB. We have civil society colleagues who are increasingly visible and increasingly effective, both as experts in the fight against TB, but also as key stakeholders in country level decisions, as well as global decisions, like at the Global Fund. And there's just more discussion than ever, in my opinion. Maybe I missed it before, but in my opinion, there's more discussion than ever about TB prevention, which I think is just really critical as part of sort of the continuum of the work that needs to happen to make sure that we can address TB and meet some of the goals before 2030 and the sort of revised goal of 2035. Today, we're focusing on vaccines, not because they are the only part of the conversation, but because they are an important part of the conversation, particularly in the context of the Global Fund, where if you look at the history of the Global Fund in terms of TB innovation in the last 20 years, it has been because of the partnership model of the Global Fund that has been able to help in the scale up of new TB tools. And so while, again, TB vaccines are not the only area where we're seeing, exciting news and development, it's a really interesting and important part of the conversation, especially in the Global Fund, because we may see some of those start to hit the ground in the next 3 to 5 years in a more real way than we thought before. And so today we're going to hear from Mike Frick from TAG about the TB vaccine pipeline, and then we're going to shift up and share with you a little bit around the relaunch of our Here I Am campaign, which I will speak to and Priyanka will speak to a little bit later in the call. But for right now, I think Mike is going to take over our screens and share a presentation and some of the information from the TB vaccine pipeline report, which I butchered the title, but it's very close to that, I think, Mike. So over to you.
All right, thanks. No, I think you got the title right. Let me know if the slides aren't showing correctly for some reason, but I think they should be good. Thanks to GFAN for having me come and talk about TB vaccines. I wanted to share a little bit of information, some highlights about what advocates should watch out for in 2025. Because I think despite the chaos around us, this is, as Katie said, still a really exciting time and a moment for some optimism in the pipeline. Of course, politics affects that, but we entered the year in a really strong and interesting place. And I next week will be sharing a publication, my annual review of TB vaccines under clinical development, part of TAG's pipeline report series. So this is kind of like a preview for GFAN, and the full report will be out soon. I wanted to start with the high-level meeting political declaration on TB because it set some very specific time-bound targets for TB vaccine development. Paragraph 76 committed governments to working with each other and with other sectors to develop new TB vaccines, preferably within the next 5 years. And in addition to doing the research to establish what they called sustainable systems for local, regional, and global manufacturing and procurement, and the equitable distribution of vaccines. So as we work on research, it's important to plan for access, and that's part of what I want to talk about, the work on access planning that is underway and could use some additional advocacy. One of the questions we always get in the TB side is why it's taking so long to develop a new TB vaccine and how it's the same or different from the COVID-19 experience. And watching the Paris Olympics last summer, it really struck me that like we're running different races. Like it's track and field, it's vaccine development for COVID and for TB, but we're not competing in the same event. So it's a little unfair to put the comparison directly together. COVID-19 was the 100-meter dash. It was just a sprint straight down the track, no obstacles in the way, go as fast as you can. And that's because we knew about the spike protein. We had mRNA technology that was ready for prime time. Governments de-risked manufacturing and threw tens of billions of dollars at it. For TB, we're running like the 400-meter hurdles. And there are these obstacles, scientific, political, economic, that we have to jump over in our quest for a new TB vaccine. And I think the other thing to point out is like we could do the hurdle ourselves or we could do it assisted with a springboard, and advocacy creates that springboard. And there are interventions that we can make as a community to make it easier to get over these obstacles. And hopefully we can talk about what some of those things are. So this slide is showing you the pipeline of TB vaccines under clinical development. This will be discussed in the report that comes out next week. I want to take just a minute to kind of walk you through it. So it's organized by phase from candidates that have reached phase 1 studies. Those are sort of small first-in-human studies through phase 2A, where we're looking at what's the right dose, trying to generate some safety data, some immunogenicity data. Phase 2B, where we're starting to look for signals of efficacy, and then phase 3, which are the late stage registrational trials. And the color coding tells you the type of vaccine that the candidate represents. So there's some diversity to the pipeline in terms of vaccine type. We have some viral vectored vaccines. The red and orange vaccines are based on mycobacteria, either TB itself or related organisms to TB that have been sort of turned into a vaccine. The green ones are protein adjuvant vaccines. And then in blue, we're starting to see the first mRNA TB vaccine candidates enter the pipeline, which is definitely a product of the COVID experience. So a couple of things to point out. I'll start with mRNA in blue since I just mentioned them. So there are really 2, 3, depending on how you count, mRNA TB vaccine candidates. The ones in phase 2A, BNT164, those are 2 mRNA vaccine constructs from BioNTech and pretty much resemble their COVID vaccines. The other mRNA vaccine candidate in phase 1 is new to the pipeline. I don't know much about it. It started a phase 1 trial just in last December, and this is a candidate out of China. There's another candidate coming out of China new to the pipeline. That's the Ad5 105K vaccine. And it's interesting to see Chinese vaccines start to have a greater presence in the pipeline, which wasn't something that was true a couple of years ago. But I think most of the attention in the pipeline is rightfully focused on phase 3, which you can also see is sort of the most crowded or full space. And certainly the candidate that has generated the most conversation is the last one that's listed, M72AS01E. I'm going to talk more about that candidate and its phase 3 trial in a couple of slides. And I'm also going to talk more about the candidate in the middle, MTBVAC, because it started a phase 2B trial just last month in February. The last thing I'll say here is that the candidates at the top, MIP and VPM, these are being studied in a clinical trial by ICMR in India. The 2 vaccines are given to household contacts of people with TB and compared to placebo. That trial is fully enrolled, it's complete, and results are known to the investigators. And we have expected those results to be shared like any week now for the past 9 months, and still no word except a couple of comments to the Indian media. I wrote to ICMR repeatedly begging to please just know when results would be published and where, and I haven't heard yet. So I think we can expect to hear sometime this year results of that phase 3 trial. So as advocates, just be aware that like this is a really active space. We're not just waiting on trials to finish, but we're also expecting some big studies to report results, and we'll need to think through and digest those as well. And so, yeah, the animation here, the red boxes are just pointing out candidates that are new to the pipeline in the past 2 years. So you can see there's some additions to the early phase, but still most of the emphasis on phase 3. And that's really what this slide here is demonstrating. So our TB vaccine pipeline has this kind of general shape. And then on the right, you can see what a more typical product development pipeline looks like, where the early phases are the bigger ones, because as you do research, candidates drop out, they don't work, they don't have the right safety. And by the time you're in phase 3, you've really winnowed things down to your best shot. We're kind of like not exactly the inverse, but definitely some other shape than this, where we are a little top heavy and have more in phase 3. And it's really a problem that phase 1 is so underpopulated because we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. There's a chance that the candidates in phase 3 right now won't work. And in that case, we need to have other vaccines in the pipeline that we can study behind them. So one of the problems we have is just a scientific problem, and that really emphasizes the need for more funding. I did want to highlight some of the things that happened in TB vaccine development last year because it was a really busy year. And not everything on this slide is going to sound like good news. And yet the field is in this really optimistic place. So last year, we heard that a candidate called H56 failed a phase 2B trial. It was what is called a prevention of recurrence trial. So this was given to people who had finished TB treatment to see if the vaccine would help to prevent them from getting TB a second time. And it did not do that. In fact, people who received the vaccine had a higher risk of relapsing disease than people who got placebo. So, in other words, the vaccine sort of had maybe the opposite of its intended effect. And as a result, development on that vaccine has stopped. There was also a disappointing trial run by the Gates Medical Research Institute of BCG, the vaccine that we've known for over 100 years and still give to children. There's been this idea that giving a second dose of BCG, what's called BCG revaccination, during adolescence might help to protect against either TB infection or TB disease. And this was looked at in a trial in South African adolescents, 1,800 South African teenagers randomized to either get placebo or a second dose of BCG to see if it prevented what is called sustained MTB infection, basically your IGRA test turning from negative to positive and staying positive. And it did not have any effect. And so, based on that disappointing result, future studies of BCG revaccination look very unlikely, except in India, where the Indian government has begun what they call a programmatic implementation study in 23 states, where they're giving BCG revaccination to adolescents and adults to study it programmatically. So we will still learn a little bit more about BCG in the coming years, but not through clinical trials. And then the big news was that the M72 ASO1E candidate, which is being taken forward by the Gates Medical Research Institute, originally developed by GlaxoSmithKline. This candidate started its long-awaited phase 3 trial, which opened to enrollment last March. And as of March 4th of this year, already 18,818 of 20,000 total participants had been enrolled, which is incredible. This is the largest TB vaccine trial since like the 1960s. The fact that we can enroll a study of 20,000 participants in basically a year is really kind of remarkable and not something that I would have put any money on at the time that the trial opened last year. So they are moving quickly. I mentioned already the ICMR study of VPM and MIP that we expect to hear results from soon, and then MTBVAC, which is being taken forward by a small Spanish biotech company working with IAVI, and it started a phase 2B trial just last month in Kenya, South Africa, and Tanzania. So some trials opening, some closing, and learning a lot in both cases. I wanted to
Max,
just show
can you
you.
slow down a little bit, please, for the interpreter? Sorry.
Slow down. Yes. Sorry, this is my New York speed. Okay, I'll go a little slower. I wanted to show you the design of the phase 3 trial of the M72 candidate, just so you can get a sense of what the study looks like. So as I mentioned, it is studying this vaccine called M72 and comparing it to placebo. M72 is a 2-dose vaccine. The doses are given 1 month apart, and 20,000 people are participating. Those people are 15 to 44 years old. And there are 3 main groups joining the trial. The majority of participants are HIV negative and IGRA positive, meaning they have some indication that they're infected with TB already. And the vaccine is really looking to see if it can prevent that TB infection from developing into TB disease in this IGRA positive population. There's a smaller cohort of people who enter the study IGRA negative, so not infected with TB already. And this is really to make sure that the vaccine is safe in these people so that eventually when we roll the vaccine out, it won't come with a testing requirement. You won't have to first test somebody for TB infection before giving them the vaccine or not. And then there's also a small group of people in the trial who are HIV positive, living with HIV, to make sure that the vaccine is safe in that population. One thing I want to say is that when the study opened a year ago, the plan was to do the study in 7 countries: Indonesia, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, Zambia, and also Mozambique and Vietnam. And the study is now only being conducted in 5 of those 7. The trial will not open in Mozambique and it will not open in Vietnam. Don't ask me why. I'm not sure yet, but just something to be aware of. Results for this study could be available in sort of the Gates Medical Research Institute has said 4 to 5 years after enrollment begins. So that would put us on a timeline of having results by like 2028. But as I said, the study is basically fully enrolled. So there's the potential to have results even sooner than that. Probably not a lot sooner unless something goes spectacularly well or especially wrong, but maybe like 2027. So still some time, but that puts us in the next kind of, global fund programming cycle and so forth. So you can think about the timeline in that respect. Now looking at this new study, a phase 2b trial of MTBVAC, which opened in February. This is being conducted by IAVI in 3 countries in Africa. It is smaller than the Gates study because it's a phase 2 trial, not a phase 3 trial. So it will enroll 4,300 people, similar age range. And in many respects, it looks similar to the M72 trial. It's also looking to see if the vaccine can prevent disease in people who already have TB infection, as indicated by a positive IGRA test. But they do have the intention and hope to include some other cohorts. They are searching for funding to include people who are IGRA negative or who don't have TB infection. And pending results of an ongoing study sponsored by the NIH, there's the chance to also maybe include people living with HIV, either in this study or future studies of MTBVAC. This candidate is kind of interesting. MTBVAC is a vaccine that is actually the TB organism itself. It is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it has been turned into a vaccine through 2 genetic deletions of genes that make TB dangerous to humans. And so it is basically presenting you with TB as kind of a vaccine, but a genetically modified version of TB. The M72 vaccine, by comparison, is a subunit vaccine. So it takes just parts of TB and pairs them with another substance called an adjuvant. So different vaccines, but being studied in kind of trials that in many respects resemble each other. This study, I should point out, is being funded by Open Philanthropy, Gates, and also the German government through KfW Development Bank. So that's the pipeline. I wanted to share now a little bit of work about what should be done by governments, advocates, others to start planning for access. One thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is that the World Health Organization has established what they're calling an accelerator council to kind of bring together governments and representatives of other sectors to figure out ways to speed this whole process up. And I'm representing civil society on the Accelerator Council. So if you ever have questions about it, please reach out to me. And I've also made a commitment to share as much as I can to civil society proactively. One of the things that the council has done is to establish a finance and access working group with a mission to promote timely, equitable access to affordably priced new TB vaccines. And this working group, which just had its first meeting several weeks ago and is meeting for a second time this Friday, is chaired by the government of South Africa, by Gavi, and by WHO. And I've listed the activities that the working group is going to undertake here. It's everything from analyzing supply, trying to get estimates of demand, mapping the supply chain behind particular vaccines to see where there are bottlenecks or supply insecurities, looking at the access and licensing deals between vaccine developers and manufacturers, and putting together some packages of how to finance TB vaccine delivery. And all of this work is building toward what the council hopes will be what they're calling a TB vaccine financing summit to be held in the fourth quarter of 2025, most likely attached to South Africa's G20 presidency. But exact details remain unknown, at least to me at this time. But the intention is to hold that kind of financing summit at the end of this year in South Africa. This slide is just taking an excerpt from a WHO publication that I hope people will look at. It's a framework to prepare for country introduction of new TB vaccines for adolescents and adults. And I thought this was a nice image where they tried to basically pull together all of the inputs and milestones attached to access. Obviously, I won't go into detail on all of this. It's in the report, but just to say, like, the devil is really in the details. And I think one thing that doesn't, for me at least, and this isn't meant as a criticism, more as just like something to think more about, come through so clearly in this framework is like the who, like who is the actor doing which of these activities? And that's something that really needs to be clarified. What is the respective role of Gavi versus Global Fund versus UNITAID versus country governments versus, country funders of these mechanisms? Where does civil society fit into this space? That's something that still needs to be articulated and maybe negotiated in some cases. I also wanted to share a little bit about how people are thinking about TB vaccine policy. And the content here is really borrowed from Gita Gerstein at WHO, although this is sort of my representation of her thinking, so don't hold her responsible for anything that is off here. In general, there are kind of two archetypes or two different pathways that a new TB vaccine could take. The first is for countries that are kind of what we might call self-procuring, where the pathway will really be one of national regulatory approval and implementation. These are places where they are not eligible for Gavi support, or that eligibility is unclear. Maybe there's graduation happening. They're a middle income country where Gavi signaled interest, but it's not totally clear yet what that will offer. Some of these places may be participating in TB vaccine trials, so they have familiarity with the candidates. Others may not. Most have regulatory authorities with high maturity levels, so they would be able to review a vaccine application and make a decision on it, independent of reliance mechanisms. Many have an interest in local manufacturing. Some even have requirements to make medical products locally in country. And these could be places that are early adopters or places with the potential to do early phase 4 implementation research. And many of these places, even if they're not Gavi eligible, could still be Global Fund eligible for TB. So that's kind of an interesting detail. The other archetype is what might be called not self-procuring countries, where global regulatory approval is really an important pathway to vaccine access. Most of these places are Gavi eligible still, and they will really look to the WHO for a policy recommendation. WHO vaccine policy comes from a group called SAGE. And a SAGE recommendation and pre-qualification of a product by the PQ program at WHO are necessary for Gavi support and UNICEF support for the vaccine procurement. Some of these countries are participating in the trials. Many have interest or capabilities for local manufacturing themselves and would largely be expected to be Global Fund eligible for TB support. So thinking through the kind of two archetypes and where countries fall within them, I think really helped me think about like the different policy pathways and how they're going to look different depending on the setting and location. Although, of course, there's variation within these kind of broad categories. The last thing I wanted to share is something else that's coming soon. We at TAG are undertaking some work together with community partners and with support from Welcome to try to assess the role of civil society and communities in TB vaccine preparedness and policy making. And there is going to be a survey launching on World TB Day that we ask you to take as your organizations and distribute in your networks. We'll be sending out more information about that on the 24th of March. And the survey is really meant to map the work of TB-focused community and civil society organizations to understand their interest and capacity in advancing TB vaccine policymaking, demand creation, implementation, access, vaccine literacy. And I should say that the final report that the survey will inform is really meant to make recommendations to funders and vaccine developers about how to resource civil society to play an active role in this space. So this I am viewing as a kind of advocacy and fundraising document for civil society. What are the kind of funding mechanisms that need to be established to support really active community engagement in TB vaccine policy and implementation? And there's some other pieces to the report in addition to the survey, but we do hope to see many groups participate in the survey. And just to say, we're doing this work in partnership with 3 regional community advisory boards, AfroCab, APCASO, ECAT, and the Global TB Community Advisory Board is a project advisory group for us. I think this is my last slide. I just wanted to let you know about some resources on vaccines from TAG. There's the pipeline report, of course. We have a report on who funds what in TB vaccine and TB research generally. And then also, like, if you just want more information on what these vaccines are, my colleague Erin developed this really cool, what we call a cheat sheet, which goes through the different types of vaccines under development for TB and kind of illustrates how they work at the cellular level, if you want to kind of get a flavor for the science and how they look different in terms of how they interact with your immune system. So those are all available on the TAG site. And I hope I didn't take too much time, Katie and Quentin, but I'll stop here.
No, I mean, thank you, Mike. It's really interesting, and I love a good cheat sheet. So thank you for that, and your colleague Erin, because those can sometimes just make the difference in terms of getting people on board. I'm going to pass it over to Quentin to talk a bit about our TB brief before we open it up for discussion, but just reminding everyone that we are going to open it up for discussion, and we'll use the hand raise function. Or if you're struggling finding it, please put a comment in the chat, and we will try to get to sort of all of them today. And I'll have one question for you, Mike, when we get to that discussion, but I'll just pass it quickly to Quentin to talk a bit about the brief that GFAN has prepared. Quentin.
Thanks a lot, Katie. And so I'll be quick with the presentation because the briefing itself is pretty short. I've posted it in the chat. So the idea, and to be fair, we sort of started working on the brief before everyone really understood what a chaos we're going to find ourselves into at this time of the year. But we really are at a turning point in global health, and as advocates, we wanted to give our advocates tools to talk about both the upsides and the downsides. And there are a number of upsides when it comes to the fight against TB that are worth looking at, in particular around innovation. So there's, as we said in opening, there's a lot of political will, but there's also, coming out of COVID, there was a lot of fear around a wave of TB overtaking everything. And that has not, like the worst case scenario that people were envisioning has not come to pass. And what we have gotten out of COVID has been a series of innovations that have entered the pipeline and are coming out now, or have come out in the past couple of years. And so we try in that brief to make the point that if these are adequately founded, they can really bring us to the last mile to end TB, reminding everyone that like TB is a millennial disease. Like it's like the idea that the end of TB is potentially within sight should really not be taken for granted. Like, of course, we've had 2030 plans, etc., for a long time, but the fact that we can very practically reach it and that we now have some of the tools to get there is really like something worth celebrating. And that's something the Global Fund investment case makes clear in particular. But there's a bit of a but. First is what kind of innovation we have coming up. So the tools for better detection and monitoring. So rapid tests are coming out quickly. And we hope that they can, because we know that testing for TB is a major challenge and major problem, especially for specific categories like children, like people living with HIV. And so new generation of tests coming out can really be a game changer. Wastewater monitoring, which has become fairly mainstream during COVID, is also a tool that can help us get ahead of a disease and start finding it before it starts becoming a major problem in a community. But a prevention, TPT is not a new tool, but we're still far from the levels of adoptions that we would need to see. And of course, we talked about the new vaccines. One of the upsides of the new vaccines in particular is that it would be the first prevention tool we have that does not rely on antibiotics. And so that has also addressed the problem of antimicrobial resistance. And finally, we have better treatments based on bedaquiline, and there's been price drops recently around that specific part of the regimens, which again makes easier to treat, in particular drug-resistant TB, which we know is like absolutely horrible to go through and to treat. But what we know of rolling out innovation is that it's not cheap. It takes time and it takes mainstreaming before products start being available to most. And it tends to be not prioritized. Countries invest in tried and true before they invest into new tools. And we saw that during Grant Cycle 7 of the Global Fund, where a lot of the newer tools were pushed to par, so the outside of allocation part of a funding request made by country. And so what that means is that these innovations are likely to be the first thing cut if we don't meet our funding targets when it comes to the Global Fund. And they are not as likely to be picked up by national programs because they start as more expensive and more experimental. And so a lot of national programs are put off by this and will rather invest in tried and true tools. So I'm putting our brief back into the chat. Have a look. Hopefully can help you make the point that it's not just that everything is going terribly, but there are also good reasons to hope that if we can fund the fight against TB, we can make lasting progress and make it towards the end. Back to you, Kate.
Thanks, Quentin. Appreciate it, and appreciate the links. I also shared the cheat sheet link with comment from Mike that the vaccine one will remain the same, but there are a few others there. We're going to just open it up for discussion at this stage to see if there are any questions in terms of what Quentin just said or Mike presented. One of the questions really quickly from me, Mike, is in terms of that survey, when you expect to be able to share some of the results of the survey, because in the Global Fund sort of, world of when you start looking towards the next implementation period in terms of guidelines being developed, et cetera, we're looking at this summer already sort of confirming the general guidelines for applicants for, a hoped for 9th grant cycle of implementation, which would be like the 2027 to 2029 implementation. So question around the survey and when the results will be available, because I think that's really important. I see a hand raised from Chase, and I'll go to Chase. And just if there's anybody else who has a question or a comment, either use the chat or raise your hand. But Chase, go ahead. And if there's no other questions, we'll go to Mike and or Quentin around that.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much for the presentation. My question's coming from the angle of the malaria vaccine, which includes the fact that the malaria vaccine is not a silver bullet. It has efficacy, but that efficacy is not far off the existing prevention prophylactic efficacy of the seasonal malaria chemoprevention, and that in fact seasonal malaria chemoprevention and the vaccine together are showing really good results. So my question ultimately is, what would be seen as a success level of efficacy for TB vaccine? Also, is there some scenario being explored about vaccines and preventive treatment together? Is that a particular arm that's being looked at? And then I had some other general questions about the number of doses and what price points we thought were feasible. But yeah, those are just some general questions coming from the perspective of the malaria vaccine, because that also touches on points of interaction between Gavi and Global Fund in the malaria space of trying to link those two interventions. So.
It's a great question. I think for TB vaccines, we should not tell our communities to expect vaccines initially that have like 95, 97% efficacy, like the COVID or the measles vaccine. The WHO has said that for TB vaccines to have a meaningful impact on the epidemic and to justify a phase 3 trial and a policy recommendation, they should have an efficacy of at least 50%. So that's where the bar has been set. Some may exceed that, right? The M72 vaccine in phase 3 that Gates is studying, in the phase 2 trial that released results in 2018, the estimated vaccine efficacy was 49.8 so forth percent. So it just hit the 50. And now there's reason to think that it could be higher in the phase 3 trial based on the endpoint definition and some other technical details. So maybe we're in the range of 60, 65% efficacy. The trial will tell us ultimately. But to your point, TB preventive treatment, when taken as prescribed, has very high efficacy, higher than 65% for sure. So I don't want anyone to think that these vaccines are going to replace preventive treatment. I think, as someone who's worked on preventive treatment for a long time, that there's a role for both. And we should be looking at ways to potentially combine them or use them alongside each other. That's not being studied explicitly in the clinical trials, but will really be up for like country implementation research and policy questions for sure. And I think we need to look at kind of prevention holistically. And the other thing I would add into the prevention toolkit is nutrition, based on results of a trial in India that showed that just supplementing the household food budgets of homes affected by TB had, reduced the risk of TB developing in household contacts by like 50%, which is exactly what we're looking for a vaccine. So we have a lot of powerful tools that we need to use for prevention. And I think we should define a space for each of them. And just quickly on the survey, really good to know about Global Fund timelines. It's like faster than we were anticipating. Our final report will probably come out in the fall, but if there is utility in sharing some of the results of this survey, which I think will be the piece of the report that maybe speaks most to the question of like global fund planning, perhaps we could do that with GFAN or others who are involved ahead of time. I think we want it to be useful rather than hold it, for like a report. So Katie, maybe let's just talk about that and we can talk to Wellcome and figure out a plan.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. And I see one more hand raised, and it's Priyanka from our team. So I'm going to let Priyanka ask her question, and then we're going to, I think, shift topics here for the call. Priyanka, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just wanted to check about the Serum Institute's reconstituted BCG vaccine that they had applied for an FDA approval on last year. I don't know if you gave an update on that and I missed it, but those results were supposed to come in this late last year, right? Like, do we have an update on that?
This is the VPM 1002 vaccine, or describe the vaccine to me one more time. It's probably that one, but I just want to make sure before I answer.
So this was supposed to be the reconstituted BCG vaccine for adults by the Serum Institute in India.
Right. So Serum, the vaccine in the pipeline that is named VPM, that is actually a vaccine based on BCG. That is BCG that has had some additional genetic modifications to it. It was initially developed in Germany at the Max Planck Institute, licensed to a small German company called Serum Life Sciences Europe. and it now is licensed to Serum Institute of India. And they were the partner with ICMR in that study in household contacts where the vaccine was given to contacts. So that's the study that we're waiting on results for. It's like Soumya, if you know Soumya Swaminathan, she has sort of given a teaser of what the results are to the Indian press. They don't seem overwhelmingly positive. But also to your point, Priyanka, the same vaccine from Serum Institute is being studied in 2 other trials that are called phase 3 studies. One is looking at whether the vaccine prevents infection in infants, comparing it to BCG directly. That trial at the moment has been stopped prematurely, which we should hear more about. The reason for that could be anything from it did really well to it wasn't going to work. I have not heard, and to my knowledge, they haven't presented that publicly. The third trial is a prevention of recurrence study where they're giving the vaccine to people who've had TB already. And that trial is in India and Bangladesh. And that trial should also have results soon. So we're going to learn a lot about the serum candidate over the coming years, coming year. And it may not all be positive. And so we should, I guess, just bear that in mind, right? Like we may get some bad news and it may not be bad news for the field at large. It may just mean that this particular candidate or any candidate didn't work, but we have some other trials that are ongoing. And just to answer Quentin's question in the chat, yeah, basically 2028 to 2029, that's our best estimate at the moment for when we'd have a vaccine ready for implementation. If you take into account the trial timeline, the time WHO needs to make policy, pre-qualification, manufacturing, maybe we could move that up a bit to 2027 perhaps, but I don't want to like oversell it. And I think expectation management is kind of important. So I still am saying 2028. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike, for being here, sharing with us. We'll be asking you if we can share your slides up on our website with the recording from this call. And we'll continue to rely on you to reach out around some of these, policy and activist sort of areas that we can support at GFAN, but also leverage, all of the colleagues that are here today and others through the network. So thank you again, and thanks to your colleagues at TAG for all the great work that you do in this area. We're going to move now to the Here I Am campaign, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague Priyanka, but I did just want to really, really quickly just contextualize for some of you who may be newer, because I have been around for a very long time now, as I'm constantly reminded in conversations. But the Here I Am campaign was first launched in 2010, before GFAN was even a thing. And was something that was launched by GFAN's former host organization, International Civil Society Support, and was really the dream and idea of a number of advocates, many of whom are still with us, some who have not made it to 2025. And in bringing this campaign back, we're really hoping to center the expertise of people living at the center of the 3 diseases and who are experiencing the work of the Global Fund and other sort of health initiatives in their lives in a very personal way at the core of why the 8th replenishment for the Global Fund, but also, across the partnership of different, agencies and organizations that find themselves in need of funding these days, which, as we know, continues to grow. We just wanted to bring this campaign back to make sure that those voices were elevated and a part of the decisions and sitting at decision-making table. So Priyanka, I'll pass it over to you really quickly, but just I'm really delighted to see this campaign come back from sort of GFAN's earlier days with a reboot. So thank you, Priyanka, and over to you.
Thanks, Katie, really appreciate it. So as Katie said, this is a reboot, but this is also sort of taking on from the current moment. And before we sort of launch into the website and I talk about what we have in store for you, I just want to basically preface this by saying that here are some facts on the screen that we have as people who've worked with communities known for a while, that communities are experts, that if a healthy community makes for a good economic system, a healthy economy, And global health challenges are not going away. The fight against TB, the fight against HIV, the fight against malaria needs to only get strengthened. It's not that we can take an approach and turn our blind eye towards these global health issues and they will go away. It's the moment is now. It's a moment of urgency and we need to act now. And the false belief that these diseases are under control is extremely dangerous. All of these tenets of all of these information pieces are not new to us and things that we have known for a while now. But it's also interesting to see that this is also sort of the data that or the findings that the data is reflecting, and the points that you see here are not just the summarization of our community-based knowledge, but also things that we have pulled from the Perceptions Hub, the reports that you might have seen about studies across multiple stakeholder groups across multiple countries, and sort of trying to understand what is resonating in terms of messaging and what really matters to the stakeholders in both donor and implementing countries. So with that, I want to share the link of the Here I Am campaign website with you. And there's also a QR code, as is customary for us to share for all of our launches. Feel free to navigate over to the website or scan the code and take a look at the website. What you will find are basically stories of people who have not just been supported by the Global Fund, but people who have the expertise of giving back to their communities and are people who have been supported by the communities to be able to be here in the way that they are, in terms of being peer educators, in terms of being supporters, in terms of being people who are making sure that others do not have to endure the difficult, challenging times that they have endured when they were going through the difficult stages of their tryst with HIV, malaria, or TB. What can you expect from us coming forward? I'm going to share my screen because I feel that will give us a better idea of what you can expect. So my screen should be up now. Can somebody let me know if my screen's up? Yes? No? Okay, great. Fantastic. So on the site, you will find, for now, our hashtags that we'll be using as a part of this campaign. The hashtag More Now Than Ever and hashtag One World, One Fight are from the campaigns of GFAN AP and GFAN Africa, respectively. And I hope that some of us have already had a chance to look at the collateral that has come out of these campaigns. If not, I will also drop a link to the respective collateral in the chat box. And you'll find stories of impact, stories talking about why it is important to continue to invest in communities. And some of our keen eyes will already spot that the visuals are looking similar to the visuals that our colleagues over at GFAN Asia Pacific and over at GFAN Africa have put out, and that's intentional, and it's our nod to the fantastic work that they have been doing and the way that they have structured their campaigns. So as we always say, aligned, but not necessarily always alike. So you'll also find how we envision the idea of these three campaigns working together and a little bit of background on that. This is just a precursor and a very minimal social media kit that we are launching today. Things will keep on, will be added on to this website as we move forward. And if you person who wants to be a part of this campaign and who wants to lend their voice to this campaign, please feel free to drop us a message and then we'll get in touch and we can take this campaign forward together. You'll also find a page on there to see what to expect next and how you can add on your voice to the campaign. And with that, I just want to quickly take a minute to hand it over to Maureen, who was one of the first initial ambassadors of over a decade ago for the Here I Am campaign. And I just want her to take the stage and bring us a little reflection on what Here I Am means to her and what she expects to see out of the campaign. Over to you, Maureen.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. And here I am. So I think Here I Am is a very special campaign for me because initially we used to say because of the Global Fund Here I Am. And that is when we were moving from a death sentence to a little hope. We used to be told that with the ARVs, we are able to live a little longer. And therefore, it was coming from what was once a death sentence to a little hope. And now science has taken us to a point where we are living our lives to the full. We are giving back to the community. We are able to join in the fight and also ensure that the new generation or the coming generation doesn't go through the fights that we fought, the challenges that we received, and that we are making the world a better place. And so we say Global Fund doesn't just save lives, it also converts the community, it changes the atmosphere, it gives hope. It is something that we can say has transformed even the mindsets of people. It was a very stigmatizing society we lived in, but now we are able to just talk freely about our status and encourage people to access services. We go beyond that from just talking about drugs and staying alive, but also addressing human rights and gender-related barriers. We have addressed very long, old, retrogressive habits in our community, such as looking down upon women, and now gender equality is a discussion that people are having every day. Girls and boys have equal opportunity. So we've gone beyond just giving pills to people to put into their mouths, but also to change the societal norms that were retrogressive, and also to make the world a better place for everyone. So here we are, here I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. So if you want to hear more of this powerful message, there's a video that some of us must have already spotted available on the website that you can take a listen to. And there are also some creative collaterals from Maureen and all of our other speakers that are featured on the website that are available for download on the Here I Am campaign website. Also, if you are finding it difficult to access it, the links to all the collateral is also available on our main GFAN website. So multiple ways in which you can go and access them, but still, if you are having any issues or any trouble in accessing them, drop me a line and we will make sure that you have the required link to get the campaign going, because, it's all of us working together to be able to ensure that the voices of the communities are heard. And it's not just about the voices of the communities, it's about the experts in the communities doing the work every single day, who need to be funded, whose work needs to carry on to save lives. So thank you so much. Any questions, any comments, any suggestions, or any burning desires to add to the creativity of the campaign are welcome now. But with that, I will give it back to Katie. Take us forward.
Thanks, Priyanka. Thank you, Maureen, for joining us. It does feel like a long time ago that we were first together. And in the UK, I think it was for your first Here I Am champion visit, which had some very fruitful outcomes at the time. So thank you for joining us again today and for continuing to support the work that we do here at GFAN. We're very grateful. Are there any questions or comments from colleagues around the Here I Am campaign and Priyanka's open, invitation to share any ideas or questions following the call? I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I think it's probably because this has landed well and is fairly well explained. And, as Priyanka said, we will be continuing to, bring more out with this campaign and use this messaging more. And it very much is a complement to our regional partners in Africa and Asia Pacific, who have in recent days or, in upcoming days are really launching their efforts around their campaigns, which have very similar goals in terms of replenishment, but also in terms of sort of focusing the expertise from implementing countries within the conversation around replenishment. So at some point, we're going to figure out a great way to put all of those hashtags together about, it is one world, one fight, and we need more now than ever. So here I am, or something like that. But we'll get back to you on that. We keep trying to figure out the best tagline that fits everything in. And just say once again, thank you to everyone for the call today, for being here. We'll be sharing the recording and Mike's PowerPoint on our website in the next coming days. And you have the link for the Here I Am campaign. We'll have the taglines to you for everything. And it's just, keep continuing to participate and finding ways to use this, but also to elevate your campaigns and your messages with us. So thanks, everybody. We hope you have a good rest of your days. We'll look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks on the next GFAN call, but probably 15 different calls before then as well. So take good care, everybody. Good rest of your days. Thank you. And thank you.
Bye-bye.